Night settles over the harbor, and the sound of water lapping against steel hulls creates a rhythm that could almost lull you to sleep. Imagine standing at the edge of a naval shipyard in the early 1940s. The air cool and damp, heavy with the scent of salt, oil, and iron. Ships line the docks like sleeping giants, their shadows long and dark beneath the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, a faint horn echoes, followed by the low rumble of engines idling. The world is at war, yet in this quiet moment, there is stillness, as though time itself has paused to listen. But within this stillness, there are whispers. Sailors trade stories in hushed tones, speaking of things they should not know, things they cannot prove. They tell of a ship that did not behave like any ordinary vessel. They tell of an experiment so secret, so strange, that it almost sounds like a dream. Some say they saw the ship vanish into a fog of green light, flicker out of existence, and reappear hundreds of miles away. Others speak of men screaming, bodies distorted, and a terror that words could never capture. Whether these tales are true or not, they have lived on, handed down like ghost stories shared in the dark, gaining weight with every retelling. The story is known today as the Philadelphia Experiment, and it has become one of the most enduring mysteries of modern legend. At its core lies the claim that the United States Navy, during the height of World War II, carried out an experiment to render a warship invisible, perhaps even to teleport it. What began as rumor grew into a cultural phenomenon, sparking books, films, and countless debates. To this day, people argue about whether it was a misunderstood military technology, an elaborate hoax, or something far stranger. As you settle in and allow yourself to drift with the sound of these words, think of how legends begin. Often they are not announced with fanfare, or written into official records. They slip in through the margins, in letters written by troubled men, in conversations overheard at bars, or in fragments of testimony whispered by those who claim to have seen what others could not. In times of war, when secrets are tightly guarded, and technology advances faster than the human mind can fully grasp, it is easy for the line between fact and rumor to blur, and when that line blurs, stories take on a life of their own. The Philadelphia Experiment sits at that very edge. Its origins are tangled in secrecy, but its details are vivid. Sailors supposedly saw a destroyer-class escort ship, the USS Eldridge, surrounded by a strange haze. Then, in an instant it was gone, vanished into thin air. Minutes later, it was said to reappear, first in Norfolk, Virginia, and then back in Philadelphia. Some accounts insist that the men aboard suffered horribly, fused into the very walls of the ship, their bodies and minds torn apart by forces they could not comprehend. Whether these stories were exaggerations, hallucinations, or fabrications, they created a chilling image that refused to fade. Tonight we will explore this legend together, not in a frantic search for proof, and not in a tone of urgency, but as a slow and steady journey. We will move gently through the history, the testimonies, and the theories. You will hear the voices of skeptics and believers, historians and storytellers. Each perspective adds a layer to the mystery, just as waves build upon one another, until the sea seems endless. There will be moments of science, where theories of invisibility and electromagnetic fields are explained. There will be moments of the paranormal, where imagination stretches into teleportation and time travel. And there will be moments of quiet reflection, where we pause to consider why such a story endures, why human beings are drawn to mysteries of the sea, of government secrecy, and of the unknown. So as you let your body relax and your mind settle, know that you are safe within the comfort of this story. You do not need to believe everything you hear, nor do you need to dismiss it. Instead, simply allow the words to carry you, as though you are drifting across calm waters at night. The Philadelphia Experiment, whether myth or reality, is a tale meant not only to intrigue, but to remind us of how vast the unknown truly is. The ship may or may not have vanished, but the story has never disappeared. It waits, just beyond the horizon, ready to rise again whenever curious minds gather. And tonight, as the waves of history and rumor lap against one another, we begin our voyage into that mystery. To understand how a legend like the Philadelphia Experiment could emerge, we need to step back into the 1940s, a time when the entire world was caught in the grip of war. The Second World War was unlike anything humanity had ever faced before. Nations were pouring every ounce of their energy, intelligence, and resources into creating new technologies that might give them even the smallest advantage. In laboratories, workshops, and secret facilities, the boundaries of science were being tested daily. Radar was developed to detect enemy planes before they appeared in the sky. Sonar could now sense submarines hiding beneath the waves. Rockets, jet engines, and early computers were being designed, each one reshaping the battlefield. The United States Navy, in particular, faced a daunting challenge. The seas were filled with threats. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking cargo ships and war vessels with deadly precision. Mines, simple, silent killers, waited beneath the water's surface, triggered by the magnetic fields of passing ships. To survive, the Navy needed more than courage. It needed innovation. Every idea, no matter how far-fetched, was worth considering if it could protect lives and turn the tide of war. It was in this atmosphere of urgency that the seeds of the Philadelphia experiment may have been planted. Scientists were tasked with exploring methods to make ships harder to detect, or even invisible, at least to the tools of the enemy. One proven method was known as degaussing. This was not mysterious. It was a technique of wrapping thick cables around the hull of a ship and running electrical currents through them. The process reduced the ship's magnetic signature, making it less likely to trigger mines. Crews often saw the coils running along the decks, humming with electricity. From a distance, and without explanation, such sights could easily appear strange, even otherworldly. The atmosphere of secrecy only fueled speculation. Military personnel were told little about the details of what scientists were doing. If sailors saw engineers stringing wires, adjusting powerful generators, or experimenting with unusual equipment, they might not have known whether it was meant for safety, navigation, or something more extraordinary. Rumors thrive in the absence of clarity, and during wartime, secrecy was absolute. At the same time, the 1940s were marked by a fascination with physics and new discoveries about the nature of reality itself. Albert Einstein's theories had reshaped how scientists thought about time and space. The possibility of bending light, distorting electromagnetic fields, or even unifying the forces of nature stirred both hope and fear. For the ordinary sailor, these concepts were distant and difficult to understand, yet they became the perfect soil for rumors. What if the Navy was experimenting with these strange ideas? What if a ship could be made, not only invisible to radar, but invisible to the naked eye? Consider also the stress of life at sea. Long nights, harsh conditions, and the constant awareness of danger created fertile ground for imagination. Sailors, young men far from home, often passed the time by sharing stories. Some of these were tales of bravery, others of superstition. Ghost ships, sea monsters, and strange lights on the horizon were already part of naval folklore. Against such a backdrop, whispers of a vanishing ship did not seem entirely out of place. There is also the element of wartime propaganda. Nations deliberately encourage secrecy, and sometimes misinformation to confuse their enemies. Newspapers reported on incredible new weapons, some real, some exaggerated. Citizens were told to trust that their governments were developing powerful tools, but the details remained hidden. Within this climate of half-truths, it is easy to see how even a fragment of unusual information could spiral into a full-blown legend. The Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, where the experiment was said to have taken place, was itself a hive of activity. Thousands of workers and sailors passed through daily. New ships were constructed and tested. The sight of glowing electrical coils, humming generators, or restricted areas would have been common. For those who did not understand the technical details, it would not be difficult to imagine that something extraordinary was underway. And once a single strange observation was paired with the imagination of men already primed to expect the unusual, the story began to take shape. In this way, the stage was set. On one side, you had the real science of the era: radar, sonar, degaussing, technologies that were both groundbreaking and mysterious to outsiders. On the other side, you had the human need to explain what could not be understood, a need that often gave rise to stories far beyond the truth. And weaving it all together was the shroud of wartime secrecy, which allowed rumors to flourish unchecked. As you listen, think about how the mind works when confronted with mystery. When we lack information, we fill the silence with possibilities. Some of those possibilities remain small and ordinary. Others expand into legends that endure for decades. The Philadelphia experiment may have begun as a misunderstanding of degaussing coils and magnetic technology, or perhaps it was a story deliberately planted to disguise real experiments. Either way, it grew from the fertile ground of a world desperate for both safety and victory. And so, as the war raged on and the seas carried both soldiers and secrets, whispers of a vanishing ship began to circulate. Whether born from truth or imagination, those whispers would soon crystallize into one of the most enduring mysteries in modern folklore. A ship that could disappear into thin air. What could be more captivating? What could be more terrifying? The world of 1943 was prepared to believe almost anything, because reality itself was already stranger than fiction. Rockets flew faster than sound, bombs carried the power of the sun. Against this backdrop, the idea of a ship made invisible by science did not feel impossible. It felt instead like the next logical step in a war where every day brought news of another unimaginable weapon. And with that, the legend of the Philadelphia experiment was ready to unfold. In the next part of our journey, we will step into the heart of the story itself, the claim that in October of 1943, the USS Eldridge truly vanished from Philadelphia's harbor and reappeared hundreds of miles away. Whether fact or fiction, it remains one of the most chilling tales ever told on the seas. Picture the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in the autumn of 1943. The war is raging overseas, but here in the United States, shipbuilders and sailors work with quiet urgency. The USS Eldridge, a newly built destroyer escort, sits in the harbor. To most eyes, it is simply another vessel, one of many constructed to protect convoys crossing the treacherous Atlantic. But to a few who claim to have been there, this ship was chosen for something more unusual, something that would turn it from an ordinary warship into the centerpiece of one of the strangest stories ever told. The story goes that on a particular day in October, the Navy carried out a highly secretive test. Generators were switched on, powerful electromagnetic equipment engaged, and suddenly the Eldridge was surrounded by a strange, almost luminous haze. Eyewitnesses described it as a glowing greenish fog, thick and unnatural, curling around the ship like a shroud. The air seemed to hum with electricity, and then, in a moment that defies reason, the ship began to fade from sight. Some said they saw its outline blur, as though the steel hull was bending in the light. Others claimed the ship vanished entirely, leaving only empty water where moments before there had been steel and men. Silence fell across the harbor, broken only by the hum of the generators and the shouts of startled onlookers. Then, just as suddenly, the ship returned. To some it reappeared exactly where it had been. But according to other versions of the tale, the Eldridge did not merely disappear. It reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia, more than 200 miles away, before returning to Philadelphia, as though distance itself had been folded like a map. The most chilling part of the legend is not the disappearance of the ship, but what allegedly happened to the crew. According to some accounts, sailors were found in horrifying conditions. A few were said to be fused into the bulkheads of the vessel, their bodies partially embedded in solid steel, as though the experiment had scrambled the very boundary between flesh and metal. Others were reported to have gone mad, screaming incoherently, or wandering in confusion, unable to remember their own names. Some supposedly burst into flames, while others simply vanished, never to be seen again. The image is haunting, men trapped in the very walls of their ship, victims of forces beyond their comprehension. These details gave the Philadelphia experiment its nightmarish reputation. Ships had sunk before, sailors had been lost, but this was something different. It was not nature or enemy fire that supposedly harmed these men. It was science, technology, and the hunger for a weapon that could defy the laws of physics. In this telling, the Navy had tampered with forces too great to control, and ordinary men had paid the price. The legend is often recounted in hushed tones, with variations that shift depending on who tells it. Some claim the experiment was a success, that the Eldridge truly became invisible for a time, proving that the Navy had cracked the secret of cloaking technology. Others argue it was an outright failure, a dangerous test abandoned after its horrifying results. Still others weave the tale into something larger, suggesting that what occurred was not just invisibility, but teleportation, or even accidental time travel. According to those accounts, the ship slipped into another dimension entirely before being forced back into ours, its crew caught in the chaos between worlds. It is important to remember that no official record supports such events. The Navy has consistently denied that any experiment of this kind ever took place. To skeptics, the story is nothing more than a mixture of misinterpreted science, rumor, and exaggeration. Yet the vividness of the details, the glowing fog, the vanishing ship, the suffering sailors, gave the story a life that official denials could not extinguish. Why do such details matter so much? Part of it lies in the power of imagery. A ship disappearing into green mist lingers in the imagination far more than a technical report about degaussing coils. The horror of sailors fused into steel walls is unforgettable, even if impossible. In the darkness of memory, such images feel real, even if the facts behind them are uncertain. They take root in the mind like a dream, resurfacing again and again, told and retold until they become legend. For many, the idea that the Eldridge vanished and reappeared taps into a deeper fascination with the sea itself. The ocean has always been a place of mystery, where ships disappear without warning and strange lights dance on the horizon. Adding the element of wartime secrecy only made the story more believable. During the 1940s, people already knew that governments were hiding extraordinary technologies. If radar could see through clouds, if bombs could split atoms, then perhaps invisibility was not so far-fetched. The Philadelphia experiment fit perfectly into a world where the impossible seemed suddenly possible. Eyewitness stories amplified the tale. Some claimed to have seen the ship vanish from a distance. Others told of barroom conversations with sailors who spoke of bizarre injuries and strange memories. These second-hand accounts created a sense of authenticity, even if they could not be verified. A rumor repeated often enough can take on the weight of truth, especially when wrapped in the authority of wartime secrecy. As you let these words carry you, consider how easy it is for a single extraordinary claim to spread. A sailor whispers a story, a witness pens a letter, a journalist prints a suggestion, and soon the tale takes on a life of its own. The Philadelphia experiment, whether it happened or not, became more than just a story about a ship. It became a symbol of hidden power, of government secrets, and of the dangers of tampering with forces beyond our understanding. The legend leaves us with a haunting image, a ship that should have been a simple escort vessel, now remembered as something more. In the mind's eye, it is forever drifting into mist, vanishing from one place and appearing in another. Its crew, whether real or imagined, stand as ghostly reminders of what happens when human ambition reaches too far, too fast. And so the story of the vanishing ship became the foundation of the Philadelphia experiment. The next stage of our journey will take us deeper into the voices of those who claim to know the truth, letters, testimonies, and the fragile human accounts that gave this legend its enduring power. For it is one thing to hear that a ship disappeared. It is another to hear a man insist he was there to see it. Every legend grows stronger when a human voice is attached to it. A ship vanishing into thin air is already a captivating tale. But when someone claims to have seen it, when someone writes it down in their own hand, with conviction, that story becomes much harder to dismiss. For the Philadelphia experiment, the voice most often remembered is that of a man named Carl M. Allen, who also called himself Carlos Allende. In the mid-1950s, more than a decade after the war, Allen began sending letters to a researcher named Morris K. Jessup. Jessup was an author fascinated by UFOs and mysteries of science, and he had written a book that speculated about advanced technologies and extraterrestrial visitors. Allen's letters, written in erratic, sometimes rambling style, claimed that Jessup's ideas connected directly to something the U.S. Navy had secretly accomplished years earlier. He insisted that he had witnessed the Philadelphia experiment firsthand. According to Allen, the Navy had used Einstein's unpublished theories to bend light and space around the USS Eldridge. He described sailors suffering gruesome fates, their bodies lost to madness or fused into the metal. Allen's letters were strange, filled with unusual phrasing, capitalized words, and sudden changes of tone. Some historians who later examined them suggested that Allen might have struggled with mental illness, yet his writing carried passion, detail, and a sense of urgency. He was not simply repeating a rumor, he presented himself as a witness, a man who had stood nearby and seen the impossible unfold. For those who wanted to believe, his letters became the closest thing to testimony. Jessup was intrigued, but cautious. He could not verify Allen's claims, but he also could not ignore them. The letters added fuel to his research, and in time, they began to circulate among others, interested in UFOs, government secrecy, and unexplained phenomena. What might have remained a single man's unusual correspondence instead became the cornerstone of an entire legend. Other supposed witnesses began to emerge as well. Some sailors claimed to have served on the Eldridge, and to have heard strange rumors, though official naval records later cast doubt on their presence. Others repeated what they said they heard from friends or barroom conversations, tales of men disappearing, ships vanishing, and experiments gone wrong. Each new account, no matter how vague, gave the story more shape. Listeners would note similarities between accounts, reinforcing the illusion of consistency, even when the details did not fully align. Psychologists often remind us that memory is fragile. Under stress, or after years have passed, the mind reshapes events in ways that feel real but may not be accurate. During wartime, when danger and secrecy were everywhere, the brain could easily blend rumor and reality. A sailor who saw electrical coils glowing on a ship might later recall it as something more dramatic, especially if stories of invisibility had already taken root. By the time a memory is retold years later, it can harden into certainty. "I was there," a witness might say with confidence, even if their recollection has drifted far from what actually happened. This is not to say that witnesses are liars. More often, they are believers in their own experiences. The human mind does not always distinguish clearly between what it sees, what it imagines, and what it hears from others. In the case of the Philadelphia experiment, each retelling reinforced the legend. The more Allen wrote, the more others believed they too had encountered fragments of the story. Like waves overlapping in the sea, their voices blended into something larger than any single testimony. Allen himself became almost as mysterious as the story he told. He lived a wandering life, rarely staying in one place for long. Some who met him described him as eccentric but sincere. Others thought he enjoyed weaving elaborate tales for attention. Yet even skeptics admit that without his letters, the Philadelphia experiment might never have spread beyond small circles of naval gossip. It was Allen's words, passed from hand to hand, that ensured the story endured. One of the most curious twists came when a version of Jessup's book was annotated with comments that seemed to expand on Allen's ideas. These notes, written in different handwriting styles, but believed by some to be Allen's work, described extraterrestrial influences, secret technologies, and the dangers of tampering with powerful forces. The annotated book, known among enthusiasts as the Veracruz Papers, or the Annotated Jessup, became a prized artifact in the world of UFO and conspiracy research. To believers, it felt like hidden knowledge had been smuggled into plain sight. To skeptics, it was simply further evidence of one man's vivid imagination. The psychology of witnesses is only one part of the story. The cultural appetite for testimony is another. People are naturally drawn to first-hand accounts, even when they contradict official statements. An eyewitness seems to cut through the fog of uncertainty, offering something solid. The Philadelphia experiment had no photographs, no official documents, no clear evidence. What it had were voices, Voices like Allen's, strange and insistent, and others that echoed the same themes in whispers and recollections. As the years passed, the legend grew, strengthened not by proof, but by repetition. Each time a new book mentioned it, each time a magazine article hinted at suppressed naval secrets, the testimony of witnesses gained more weight. For some listeners, Allen's letters became scripture, a direct link to forbidden knowledge. For others, they were merely curious ramblings, a reminder of how easily a story can take root when someone writes it with passion. And here is the paradox: the very strangeness of Allen's letters, their messy grammar, their uneven tone, their unusual phrasing, made them feel authentic to some readers. They did not read like polished fiction. They read like the frantic words of someone desperate to share a truth, too heavy to carry alone. In that rawness, believers found honesty. When we reflect on these witness accounts, we see how fragile truth can be. Was Allen really a man who saw the Eldridge vanish before his eyes? Was he misled by rumor and memory? Or was he an imaginative storyteller, whose words simply found the right audience? Perhaps the answer is not as important as the effect. His letters breathed life into a story that might otherwise have faded, and in doing so, they invited others to step forward with their own fragments of testimony. The Philadelphia experiment became not just a tale of a vanishing ship, but a chorus of voices, each adding to the mystery. Whether accurate or imagined, those voices gave the story endurance. For in the end, a legend needs only belief to survive, and belief often rests on the shaky foundation of testimony. As we drift onward in this journey, we turn from the voices of witnesses to the silence of authority. For if the sailors and storytellers whispered of vanishing ships, what did the U.S. Navy say? Did they admit to experiments gone wrong, or did they dismiss the tale as nonsense? The next part of our story takes us into the official record, or just as importantly, into the gaps where the official record falls silent. No legend of conspiracy is complete without the weight of official denial, and the Philadelphia experiment is no exception. From the very beginning, the U.S. Navy has categorically denied that such an experiment ever took place. According to naval records, the USS Eldridge was never even docked in Philadelphia during the alleged time of the experiment in 1943. It was, instead, stationed in New York and the Bahamas. For the Navy, this case is simple. The claims are false, the stories are fabrications, and the Philadelphia experiment is nothing more than a mixture of rumor and misinterpretation. Yet for many, the firmness of these denials only deepens suspicion. After all, if the experiment truly were a classified wartime project, wouldn't denial be the expected response? Media coverage added another layer of intrigue. In the late 1950s, the story gained traction after researcher Morris K. Jessup received those strange rambling letters from Carlos Allende. Jessup himself initially dismissed Allende as unreliable, but the letters became infamous when the Office of Naval Research received a heavily annotated copy of Jessup's book, The Case for the UFO, filled with strange comments about advanced technology, time travel, and extraterrestrial intervention. To outsiders, the very fact that the Navy had any involvement with these documents appeared suspicious. Why would the Navy even bother keeping such fringe material if the claims were completely baseless? This sparked the belief that the government knew more than it was willing to say. As the years passed, journalists, researchers, and documentarians sought to peel back the mystery. Some found inconsistencies that weakened the story. For instance, naval logs showed the USS Eldridge's movements with precision, placing it far from Philadelphia during the summer of 1943. To skeptical reporters, this was proof that the experiment could not have occurred as described. Others, however, argued that official records could have been altered or falsified, particularly if the experiment was of high secrecy. In a Cold War context, when nuclear testing and covert projects were hidden from public view, many were unwilling to take official statements at face value. The media's role in shaping the Philadelphia experiment cannot be overstated. Popular magazines and newspapers in the 1950s and 1960s sensationalized the story, often leaning into its more bizarre elements, sailors vanishing, teleportation across hundreds of miles, or men becoming fused into the ship's walls. Even television documentaries in later decades presented the legend with a careful balance, offering official denials, but placing them side by side with vivid eyewitness claims. For audiences, this created the impression of a government versus the people dynamic, where truth was buried under layers of bureaucracy and secrecy. Government behavior itself sometimes fed into these suspicions. During the post-war years, real military projects, such as MK-Ultra mind control experiments, Operation Paperclip, the recruitment of Nazi scientists, and covert nuclear testing came to light. These revelations demonstrated that the U.S. military and intelligence services were in fact capable of hiding large-scale, ethically questionable projects for decades. Thus, even when the Navy denied the Philadelphia experiment, many members of the public wondered, why should we believe them now, when history has shown their willingness to conceal? Furthermore, the Philadelphia experiment became entangled with the rising UFO phenomenon of the mid-20th century. Investigators noted that the experiment's timeline overlapped with a surge in UFO sightings during World War II and the post-war years. Some theorists argued that the Navy may have been experimenting with technology derived from crashed UFOs, or at least inspired by similar physics. Government silence on UFO matters, often cloaked in national security justifications, only deepened the perception that official denial was more about control than truth. From a psychological standpoint, the tension between eyewitness accounts and government denials created the perfect breeding ground for conspiracy. Humans naturally distrust large institutions, particularly when those institutions are powerful and secretive. Every denial was not taken as evidence of falsehood, but as confirmation of a cover-up. This dynamic has played out time and again, from Roswell to Watergate, to modern discussions of classified UFO programs. By the 1970s and 1980s, the Philadelphia experiment had become a cultural touchstone, and government statements had little power to extinguish the growing fire. Documentaries, books and films often portrayed the Navy's denial as a suspicious silence rather than a definitive truth. Even when investigative journalists uncovered logistical contradictions in the story, the legend persisted. For many, the mystery was not whether the Navy had lied about the Philadelphia experiment, but rather why. Was it to protect classified technology, to shield the public from terrifying truths, or to quietly cover up a tragic failure that cost human lives? Thus, the official stance of denial and the investigative curiosity of the media worked together to elevate the Philadelphia experiment into a cultural phenomenon. Without denial, the story might have faded as an odd sailor's tale. Without media amplification, it may never have reached beyond obscure circles of UFO researchers, but together they transformed a set of strange letters and testimonies into one of the most enduring conspiracy legends of the 20th century, one that continues to provoke questions about secrecy, trust, and the limits of government power. As the Philadelphia experiment legend spread, researchers, writers, and enthusiasts began to move beyond the basic claim of invisibility. Over time, the story became a canvas for alternative and paranormal theories that sought to explain what might have happened, or what people believed might have happened, in Philadelphia in 1943. These theories stretch from the edges of mainstream science into the realms of time travel, dimensional physics, and even extraterrestrial technology. While skeptics dismiss them as speculative fantasies, their persistence shows how deeply the experiment captured the imagination of those looking for meaning in unexplained phenomena. One of the most enduring alternative theories is the idea that the Navy was not simply trying to make the USS Eldridge invisible to radar, but was instead experimenting with manipulating space-time itself. Proponents of this theory often cite Albert Einstein's unified field theory, a speculative framework that attempted to bring together the forces of electromagnetism and gravity. Although Einstein himself never completed the theory, Some claim that military scientists during World War II attempted to apply its principles in practical experiments. According to this view, the massive electromagnetic fields generated around the ship may have bent space-time, unintentionally causing the ship to teleport from Philadelphia to Norfolk, Virginia, before reappearing minutes later. Supporters argue that this would explain the reports of sailors suffering from disorientation, vanishing, or becoming fused with solid metal. Another layer of speculation suggests that the experiment opened a temporary gateway into another dimension. In this interpretation, the ship did not simply vanish from sight, but slipped partially into a parallel universe. Testimonies of men who were said to have frozen or become unstable in our reality are taken as evidence that they were caught between dimensions, their bodies struggling to remain whole. This notion of dimensional travel has since echoed through countless works of science fiction, yet it continues to be raised seriously by those who believe that the Philadelphia experiment represented humanity's accidental brush with interdimensional physics. A more paranormal theory involves extraterrestrial influence. Some writers argue that the Navy's wartime research may have been assisted by alien technology, either reverse-engineered from crashed UFOs or directly provided by extraterrestrials. This theory gained traction in the 1950s and 1960s, when UFO sightings became widespread, and the idea of secret government deals with aliens entered popular imagination. If true, the Philadelphia experiment would not have been an isolated military test, but part of a larger pattern of hidden collaboration between humans and beings from beyond Earth. For believers, this would explain why the Navy has remained silent. Admitting the truth would expose the reality of UFOs and humanity's limited grasp of the forces at play. Psychological and metaphysical theories also emerged, particularly among paranormal researchers. Some claimed that the sailors' disturbing experiences were not physical at all, but psychic. According to this idea, the massive electromagnetic fields may have triggered altered states of consciousness, opening the minds of crew members to visions of other realities. These visions, interpreted as literal experiences, became fused into the experiment's mythology. Reports of madness, hallucinations, or men wandering out of sync with reality are seen by some as evidence that the experiment had as much to do with consciousness as with physics. There are also hybrid theories that combine government secrecy with occult practices. Certain fringe researchers have argued that the Navy may have incorporated esoteric knowledge, drawn from sources like theosophy or ritual magic, into its scientific work. The overlap of wartime desperation, scientific ambition, and occult curiosity makes this theory particularly compelling to those who see history as guided by hidden currents of forbidden knowledge. While there is no direct evidence to support this claim, the very blending of military technology with mysticism fits neatly within the cultural imagination of secret experiments. Skeptics argue that these theories reflect less about the actual events of 1943 and more about human storytelling itself. The Philadelphia experiment, they suggest, became a mythic structure onto which society projected its fears and hopes, fears of technology spiraling out of control, and hopes of hidden powers waiting to be unlocked. Alternative theories thrive, not because they are provable, but because they satisfy the yearning for mysteries larger than ordinary life. They provide explanations where official narratives leave only silence and denial. Still, for those who believe, the range of alternative theories makes the Philadelphia experiment one of the most flexible legends in modern history. It can be framed as a scientific accident, a paranormal encounter, a brush with alien intelligence, or a glimpse into realities beyond our own. Each interpretation reshapes the story into something new while preserving its core mystery, that something extraordinary happened in 1943, and that its consequences ripple outward to this day. In the end, the alternative and paranormal theories surrounding the Philadelphia experiment do more than attempt to explain the unexplainable. They reflect the human hunger for mystery, the blending of science with imagination, and the sense that behind every government denial may lie a reality stranger than fiction. Whether these theories are symbolic expressions or glimpses of hidden truth, they ensure that the Philadelphia experiment remains not just a story of ships and sailors, but a window into the boundless frontier of the unknown. While debates over the Philadelphia experiment's reality continue, one thing is undeniable: the story's cultural footprint is vast. Even if it were entirely fictional, its influence on books, films, television, and collective imagination has been immense. Like Roswell or Area 51, it has transcended its origins to become part of modern mythology, a symbol of hidden knowledge, forbidden science, and government secrecy. The legend grew not only because of what people believed happened, but because of how it resonated with the fears and fascinations of the 20th century. The story first spread in niche circles of UFO researchers and fringe theorists in the 1950s, but by the 1970s it had captured mainstream attention. Popular magazines began running articles, blending sensational claims with kernels of fact, ensuring the story reached wider audiences. This was also the era when science fiction was flourishing. Stories of invisibility, teleportation, and time travel were common themes in novels and films, and the Philadelphia experiment fit seamlessly into this cultural landscape. It gave readers and viewers the thrill of imagining that such fantastical technologies might not be pure fiction, but hidden realities suppressed by official channels. The legend reached a new peak of visibility with the 1984 science fiction film, The Philadelphia Experiment. Although heavily fictionalized, the movie dramatized the idea of sailors trapped in a malfunctioning experiment that hurled them through time. For many people, this film was their first exposure to the story, and its imagery, sailors half merged with steel, ships vanishing into glowing light, left a powerful impression. The movie also reinforced the experiment as a cautionary tale about human hubris, echoing age-old myths about tampering with forces beyond our understanding. In the decades that followed, references to the Philadelphia experiment appeared in television programs, novels, and even music. Shows like The X-Files and Fringe used it as a touchstone for stories about government conspiracies and hidden science. Writers found in it a flexible symbol. It could represent the dangers of unchecked experimentation, the secrets of military power, or the tantalizing possibility of breakthroughs that could change everything we know about the universe. Each retelling added layers, blending the historical with the imaginative, until the experiment became less a single event and more an archetype of modern mystery. Beyond entertainment, the experiment influenced how people viewed real-world science and government. During the Cold War, fears of secret weapons and hidden technologies were widespread. The Philadelphia experiment gave those fears a concrete narrative. If the Navy could teleport a battleship, what else might the government be hiding? Later, as stories of MK Ultra and other covert projects were exposed, the experiment was retroactively seen by some as part of a broader pattern of dangerous secrecy. Even skeptics admitted that the tale, whether true or not, captured the essence of a historical period defined by mistrust, secrecy, and technological ambition. Culturally, the experiment also resonated with deeper human themes. It spoke to the fear of losing one's place in reality, of being swallowed by forces unseen and uncaring. The image of men fused into steel is more than just a gruesome detail. It is a metaphor for the dehumanizing effects of war, technology, and secrecy. The sailor's fate embodies the anxiety of being reduced to an experiment, caught in systems too vast to comprehend. This symbolic weight is part of why the Philadelphia experiment endures. It reflects not just curiosity about science, but anxieties about power, control, and the fragility of human existence. In modern culture, the experiment continues to inspire documentaries, podcasts, and YouTube explorations. It has been reframed for each generation, sometimes as a symbol of alien contact, sometimes as a metaphor for time travel, sometimes as an allegory for the dangers of hidden science. Even skeptics who dismiss it as fiction often find themselves fascinated by the cultural echo it has created. Like a ghost story passed down through generations, it evolves with the times, adapting to new fears and new technologies. Ultimately, the cultural impact of the Philadelphia experiment demonstrates the power of storytelling. Whether or not it ever happened, it has shaped how people think about secrecy, technology, and the unknown. It serves as a reminder that legends do not need to be factual to be meaningful. The experiment lives on not because of evidence, but because it stirs something deeper, a longing to believe that behind the ordinary lies the extraordinary, waiting to be uncovered. As the Philadelphia experiment passed into legend, modern researchers, skeptics, and investigative journalists began to dig more deeply into the claims. Their goal was not simply to repeat the chilling testimonies or amplify the mysteries, but to determine what, if anything, might lie at the core of the story. The results have been mixed. While many investigators conclude that the experiment is largely myth, their work also reveals why the legend has proven so durable, and why even debunking it seems to strengthen its cultural hold. One of the earliest systematic efforts to debunk the story involved analyzing naval records. According to ship logs, the USS Eldridge was not in Philadelphia during the summer and fall of 1943, the period when the experiment allegedly occurred. Instead, it was stationed in New York and later escorting convoys in the Atlantic. These logs are detailed and cross-referenced with Allied fleet records, leaving little room for the ship to have vanished mysteriously from Philadelphia harbor. To skeptics, this is a key piece of evidence. If the ship was never in Philadelphia, the story collapses at its foundation. Yet believers counter that official records cannot be trusted when dealing with classified experiments. Wartime secrecy, they argue, would have made falsifying logs a simple matter, especially if the experiment was intended to remain hidden for decades. This stalemate between official evidence and cover-up theory is emblematic of conspiracy narratives in general. Each piece of disproof can be reinterpreted as evidence of deeper secrecy. Other modern investigations have focused on the technical plausibility of the claims. Physicists and engineers have pointed out that invisibility, teleportation, and time travel require an energy output far beyond anything available in the 1940s. Even Einstein's unfinished unified field theory could not provide the kind of practical framework suggested by believers. Experiments with electromagnetism, they explain, can indeed produce unusual effects, but nothing close to rendering a warship invisible. The idea of sailors being fused into bulkheads is particularly implausible from a scientific perspective, more akin to horror fiction than physics. One explanation offered by skeptics is that the Philadelphia experiment legend may have been a misinterpretation of real, but less spectacular, naval projects. During World War II, the Navy experimented with degaussing, a process that used electrical cables wrapped around a ship's hull to reduce its magnetic signature and protect it from magnetic mines. To an uninformed observer, the sight of glowing cables, sparks, and strange machinery might have seemed otherworldly, especially when accompanied by rumors of secrecy. Over time, such observations could have been exaggerated into stories of invisibility and teleportation. Psychologists studying the legend also point to the role of human memory and imagination. Eyewitnesses such as Carlos Allende were prone to embellishment, and in an era of widespread interest in UFOs and hidden science, stories tended to grow with each retelling. Cognitive psychology shows that once an idea takes root, especially one as vivid as sailors trapped in steel, it can feel more real than ordinary memory. This helps explain why stories that began as rambling letters could ignite decades of fascination. Modern media investigations have also played a significant role in shaping how the experiment is perceived. Documentaries often present both sides. On one hand, historians showing naval records and technical debunking, on the other, believers recounting chilling testimonies. This balanced approach leaves viewers suspended between skepticism and wonder. Ironically, even programs designed to debunk the experiment tend to give it renewed life, as audiences remain intrigued by the possibility that something strange might still be hidden beneath the surface. Another modern angle comes from the rise of declassified information. Over the decades, genuine secret projects such as MK Ultra, stealth aircraft, and advanced radar systems have been revealed. Each revelation reinforces the idea that governments do conduct bizarre hidden experiments, sometimes for years, sometimes at great moral cost. While these projects are not related to the Philadelphia experiment, they provide fertile ground for conspiracy thinking. If the government could hide those, believers argue, why not a failed teleportation experiment as well? In recent years, the Philadelphia experiment has also been re-evaluated in the light of contemporary science. Quantum mechanics, wormholes, and new theories about space-time have given the legend fresh plausibility in the public imagination. Even though no credible physicist argues that the Navy could have achieved such breakthroughs in 1943, the mere existence of exotic scientific ideas allows the myth to remain compelling. The story continues to adapt, aligning itself with whatever cutting-edge science captures the public imagination in a given era. Ultimately, modern investigations have shown that the Philadelphia experiment is best understood as a mixture of fact, fiction, and cultural projection. There is little evidence to suggest that a ship truly vanished, yet the persistence of the legend reveals something deeper: a collective fascination with the limits of knowledge, the boundaries of secrecy, and the possibility of forces beyond our control. In this sense, the debunkers and the believers are engaged in the same process. They are both keeping the story alive. Even when stripped of its supernatural claims, the Philadelphia experiment remains an enduring tale. For skeptics, it is a case study in how myths form and endure. For believers, it is a reminder that official truths may not be the final truths. And for the broader culture, it is a story that continues to bridge the gap between science, mystery, and imagination. Whether real or not, the experiment lives on in the space between what we can prove and what we cannot stop wondering about. As we drift to the final part of this story, the Philadelphia experiment stands before us, not only as a tale of ships and sailors, but as a mirror reflecting our deepest questions about reality, secrecy, and belief. Whether one views it as fact, fiction, or something in between, the story has carried countless listeners into that space between the known and the unknown, a liminal place where imagination and history intertwine. It is here, in this quiet space, that the legend continues to live, not in laboratories or naval records, but in the collective human mind. The experiment, at its heart, is less about a vanished ship and more about what it symbolizes. It embodies the age-old human desire to push boundaries, to harness forces greater than ourselves, and to glimpse what lies beyond ordinary perception. It also reflects our unease with power, scientific power, governmental power, and the power of secrets withheld. The image of men lost, broken, or forever changed by forces they could not control resonates as a timeless warning. It reminds us that progress often comes with risks, and that behind every innovation lies the shadow of unintended consequences. In reflecting on the Philadelphia experiment, we also reflect on the nature of stories themselves. Legends like this one endure because they are not confined to facts alone. They weave together fragments of truth, layers of imagination, and the emotional needs of those who tell them. They provide comfort and mystery, suggesting that the world is richer and stranger than it appears. They give voice to anxieties that otherwise might remain unspoken: the fear of losing control, the suspicion of hidden powers, and the longing to believe that reality holds more than what we can measure. Even if the Philadelphia experiment never happened, it continues to serve a purpose. It gives us a safe way to explore what it might mean to stand at the edge of the unknown. It allows us to consider questions of invisibility, teleportation, and time travel not only as scientific curiosities, but as metaphors for our own lives. Who among us has not wished to disappear, to escape, or to move beyond the constraints of time? The legend whispers to those desires, offering a story where the impossible briefly becomes real. Today, as the world grows more complex, the experiment still calls to us. In an age of surveillance, advanced technology, and secrets hidden in classified files, it remains relevant. It invites us to ask what is still hidden from us, what truths lie behind government denials and official records, and if a story like this can live for 80 years without fading, what other secrets might still be waiting in the shadows, unspoken but alive. As you rest, allow these questions to drift with you into sleep, Let the mystery settle into your thoughts, like a gentle tide. Whether you believe the USS Eldridge vanished into green mist, or see it as nothing more than myth, the story has done its work. It has guided you through history, science, speculation, and imagination. It has reminded you of the fragile balance between curiosity and caution, between knowledge and wonder. The Philadelphia experiment may never be proven or disproven. Perhaps that is its true power. It endures not because of certainty, but because of mystery. It reminds us that some stories are not meant to be solved, but to be carried, like dreams, like whispers, like the soft echo of waves against a distant harbor. And as you drift into sleep, you too carry the story forward, into the endless ocean of the imagination, where ships vanish, reappear, and sail forever on the edge of the unknown.